Thursday, April 24th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, it's not Remembrance Day, it's not Memorial Day, but today we're talking about remembrance, how it's shaped our collective identity, what it looks like in today's world, and how it will continue to evolve in the future. We want your thoughts on this. All right, so, why are we doing the show, right? I just said it's not Remembrance Day, it's not Memorial Day. Why today? Well, Memorial University, as most of you folks know, was founded as a living memorial to those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the First World War. And this coming weekend, there's a panel discussion, Living Memorial, Memorial University and the Meaning of Remembrance. So MUN and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment are partnering on a panel event, right, to explore the significance of remembrance through shared stories, historical reflection, discussions on the evolving nature of commemoration. So I heard about this and I was like, you know what, I'd like to do that for my show. So we've got the panelists here, and if you're in other parts of the province and you can't make it this weekend, you get to hear about it now. And if you can, well, this is a great, if you're going to this thing, this is a great primer for you, right? An amuse-bouche for the conversation. The lines are open, and my question's for you. How has remembrance shaped the identity of this province, or for you and your family? Anyone left out from that? What does it look like in today's world? How's it evolving? The numbers to call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. I guess I'll go right to left and say hi. Joining me here in studio, full studio today, Gary Browne is back, author, historian, former member, Newfoundland National War Memorial Committee and Unknown Soldier Repatriation Project Committee. It's nice having you here when it's not summer or fall, even though, it could be November weather outside here now.
That's what it feels like, but thank you very much for having me back. It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
Earl Ludlow is here, Chancellor, Memorial University, retired engineer, moderator for the event. So we've got some questions for you. Thanks for coming in. Nice, first time we've met. This is nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Frank Gogos is back, current chair of the Royal Newfoundland Regimental Advisory Council, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Museum, researcher with the Unmarked Graves program. Frank, how you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good. I don't know if have we been in studio together? Because I've interviewed you numerous times, but I don't know if this is the first time we've sat down like this. Either way, doesn't
Honestly,
matter.
I can't remember.
Yeah, since the pandemic, time's a flat circle for me. I can't keep track. So nice to have you here anyways. And we've got Jeff Webb here, professor and head of Memorial University's History Department. How are you doing?
Very well. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, nice to meet you too. Thanks for coming in. All right, when it comes to, for yourselves, that word remembrance, each of you has got a different lens on this and different thoughts around it. But just for the kickoff, Jeff, we'll start with you. Like, what does that word mean to you, remembrance, or what do you think it should mean?
Well, I think whenever you're talking about remembrance, you're emphasizing what's relevant to ourselves. So what we choose to remember, what we choose to celebrate, what we choose to commemorate tells us more about ourselves, our own priorities, our own concerns, than it tells us about the lives of the people in the past. So for memorial generally, and for remembrance in the bigger sense of things, it's always something that evolves and always something that remains contemporary.
All right. Thank you. A great start to that. Frank, what about yourself?
For me, remembrance is more of a teaching tool to engage people on what the sacrifices that need to be made and the consequences of those sacrifices to everyday people who are forced to become a part of that. And, through the years, I've had the good fortune to take young people on trips overseas where we get to educate them on how, what remembrance actually means. Is it about the actions and the wars, or is it really about the true cost to society?
Earl, what about yourself?
I can't be near as insightful, I think, as my previous do, but I've got to say, I look at remembrance from a perspective of, I like the learning tool concept, where we came from, how we came about, but also how it can be used to improve our future. And that, I think, is the big piece of this weekend's panel. And in particular, a lot to learn from the past, a lot of solid messages, both from the history, the sacrifice, and the learnings and the commitments, but also how do we use that to turn it to the next 100 years for Memorial University. And that, I think, is going to be the real trick as we go forward. I probably won't be here to know about it, Adam, but I'll try.
Gary, what about yourself?
Well, it's the word itself, remembrance. What it means to me is remembering those who served and those who gave so much. And it's taken up a considerable part of my adult life, studying remembrance, especially in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's so important that we do just that, remember and commemorate these heroes, and to make sure that when the time comes, we don't forget, and we are who we are, and we are who we are because of these people who served and who are serving today. So it's a living continuum. It's something that we can go back in Newfoundland way back to the War of 1812-15, speaking of Newfoundlanders who gave the supreme, and Labradorians gave the supreme sacrifice. But it's so important that we make sure that we remember them. And I wrote a book on the fallen boy soldiers of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, where there was 272 teenagers, boy soldiers from Newfoundland and Labrador who fought in World War I, and of them, 114 have no known names. So you can just imagine the tragedy that was for parents home here, thousands of miles away from the battlefields and the grave sites, who would never get over to see where their son had lost their life, or even 114 had no known graves. So remembrance is from a social history perspective, for me, it's very important, and we got to make sure our future generations, when we pass that torch to them that Colonel McRae talked about in his famous poem.
And when you think, for what you're saying there too, time and place, right? It's not the high-tech information world we have today. Finding out information of just what was happening, where folks were going, literacy rates at the time, poverty rates at the time, just what the world was like when they went for that, as you said, right, as boy soldiers, and then learning lessons for today and how to kind of expand that out. Really important stuff. Why is this happening now? For this discussion, like what's because like I said, right, it's not Memorial Day, it's not Remembrance Day, and you touched on it, but sure, Earl, go into it.
Well, this is the 100th anniversary, or we're coming up on it. The actual Memorial University or University College opened on September the 15th, 1925, and it's 100 years. And when we look back, and my learned friends here can fill in a lot of the details. But in my research and work with Memorial, and again with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and with other groups around Newfoundland and Labrador, we got to think back as to where we came from. It wasn't just the world; it was Newfoundland. Now, today we're Newfoundland and Labrador, but then it was Newfoundland. And in particular, poverty, illiteracy, lack of leadership, lack of training, lack of opportunity. The opportunity went to the fishing boat. And that was it. Our leaders were imported. And the few that were educated were sent away, and many didn't come back. And in 1925, there was a break from the denominational education system to create a university or a college that basically broke that down and focused on development, education, training, and brought that forward. And that was the start. So the reason we're here today and this weekend talking about that is just that, is to reflect back on how we got here and how we're going forward.
Something we've talked about before on the show, around remembrance, and just before the show started today, as you folks were getting sat down, I was mentioning the choice between a university and a war memorial, and the discussion around that back post First World War. Look at the historians, and just any thoughts on the time and place for Newfoundland and Labrador, but back then, the fact that you had to have this type of a discussion because of the money available, and the fact that we ended up with both.
Okay. Going back to what you said about the start was breakdown of the denominational system. It actually began with Padre Nangle in the trenches during the war, and out of that came a cohesiveness with the veteran corps that survived. Mm-hmm. And everybody understood that they needed to have a physical representation, which is your monuments. But the discussion started to begin. How do we tackle those returning home? What are we going to do with them? So the Newfoundland government did have programs in place. If you wanted to get educated, they would pay for it, and they would actually send you to Canada or Britain or the United States, depending on whether or not you fit the criteria and whether or not how expensive it was, etc. And
but I mean that even with that, those are hurdles, right? Like, it's okay, sure, we can send you somewhere depending, like you said, depending on the price, depending on this, depending on that, as opposed to having a university for folks to go to and to lift people up here in the
exactly. And the university was started to help, and the veterans and the Great War Veterans Association in Newfoundland were very much involved in the discussions during the period, and they wanted a place that Newfoundlanders, something concrete that would live. The living memorial would continue on afterwards. And so it was a very important piece. And if we look at the Second World War, we really don't see many monuments to the Second World War after that. They chose to build a memorial stadium instead. To put their efforts into a community effort. And there were public libraries around the island as well that came out of that.
So, Adam, I was surprised at the Memorial College. You'd originally think that everyone was behind this. That is not so. It was more about we need to put up a shelter, or we needed to do this, and we needed to do other things. And I know there was one quote, and I can't quote it per se, but I can get close to it. Sure. As I can't wait for the next couple of years when that building that was built can eventually no longer be a school and turn into a place for wayward people, or something of that sort. That's 100 years ago. Yeah. So, that conflict existed, but it was the vision and thought that far outweighed that drove this in place. And, you go back to Padre Nangle, awesome. Just think about the foresight and what happened.
I would certainly, build on everything that's come here before. I mean, in some respects, there really wasn't a Newfoundland before the 20th century. Many outports, the West Coast very much looked to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Nova Scotia rather than looking to England. So it was really, the memorial was one of the few institutions that brought people from all of these small little communities, brought them here, gave them a common experience where if they were United Church or Methodist or Anglican or Roman Catholic, they were in the same classroom together. And then they went back out into outports as school teachers and clergy to sort of bring this common Newfoundland culture back out. So it's really hard for me to imagine what the place would be here if it wasn't for the century of memorial being one of the things that glued us together.
Yeah, building. And when I think too, you have this, so for the First World War, unimaginable loss, suffering. And then out of that, you have folks who are looking ahead to the future of what you want to build, and community building, legacy building, people building, and you say, let's have education, and we will do it remembering what we have lost.
Yeah, and there was, as our other guests said, there was quite a battle going on between the pro for the utilitarian side, the college, and of course Padre Nangle, the World War I padre for the regiment, who actually recruited people here, went over there, buried them, and he knew in his own heart there was no way that Newfoundlanders would ever be able to afford to go across to Europe and see the graves or see the monuments. So that's why it was so important that he fought for the visual, the optical National War Memorial, and when someone would pass by it. And he got quite animated about he knew that there was a school needed with his background in religious and teaching for Newfoundland, but his attitude was, we have to put a memorial there for the people who died and the ones who suffered so much and who came back. but it's the job of the Department of Education to look after making a memorial, and that's what he said. But luckily enough, we got the best of both worlds, because Nangle stood strong, and also the government at the time, Sir Richard Squires and his government said, no, we're going to go also a step further, and the Department of Education had sold them, the commissioners, on the importance of education. Adam, if I can just share something with you that I hope to share with the good moderator on Saturday. While doing research for the upcoming panel discussion on Mon and Remembrance, I came across a very interesting article in the 2001 Newfoundland Quarterly by the late Dr. Malcolm MacLeod, a native Nova Scotian, scholar, former well-respected Mon History Department educator, and the past president of the Newfoundland Historical Society. And this is what he said, and I quote, of all the universities in Canada, the one with the most profoundly meaningful name is Memorial University of Newfoundland. It is a name worth dissecting and dwelling upon. The college that opened in St. John's in September 1925 was given a very special name indeed. Then MacLeod went on to tell of how each morning a senior Mon security staff member turns on a new page in the Book of Remembrance situated in the Arts Administration Building at Memorial, and turns it over. And then he further stated in his article, Dr. MacLeod, if Memorial ever wished to give a higher profile to the idea of the university as an act of remembrance, a recorded verse of the Ode to Newfoundland could play while the page-turning ceremony performed, and traffic through the lobby would cease. It would, however, be an impressive way to remind everyone, students, staff, and visitors, that Memorial in the name really means something. The list of the war dead read like a call of familiar family names in a large Newfoundland school when the boys came back in bloodied from recess. I mean, wow, I think that says it all.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And Adam, I'm going to jump right in.
Go
that process of turning that page in the Book of Remembrance happens every day, today.
Wow.
And very few people understand and know that, but it is every day that page is turned.
You're listening to The Signal. Today we're talking about remembrance, and I'm asking, how has remembrance shaped our collective society? Anyone left out from that? And we'll jump into that in this discussion in a little bit as well. What does it look like in today's world? How is it evolving? And this is today's discussion is before a panel discussion taking place at Memorial University this week in Living Memorial University, and the meaning of remembrance. If you want to join the discussion, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255, text 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca for emails. And we got an email here. Hello, Adam. In an NL context, for me as an immigrant, it means being able to recognize and appreciate the sacrifices that have been made by those who came before me, even if I wasn't born here. The act of remembrance and the respect of its symbols should be instilled in all who live here, regardless of whether they came from away or were born here. Some of the things I've come to enjoy here are a direct result of that sacrifice. Best, Nicholas Lim. Thank you, Nicholas, for that email. It says a lot. And as we grow as a province for Newfoundland and Labrador, and communities change and evolve over time. On the phone lines, we've got Frank Holden calling from St. John's. Hi, Frank.
Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Not bad.
What are your thoughts on remembrance?
Well, it's great that we have a sports stadium, and they still haven't removed the sign because people insisted on keeping it up, Memorial Stadium, and great that you name a university after the same concept in memory of largely the trauma seems to have been in World War I. That's great, too. I couldn't think of a better way to name a university. However, every fall and every summer, I keep seeing or hearing the memory of the fallen and the maimed conflated with a positive militarist mentality. Now, look, Governor Davidson, and with the assistance of the Premier of the time, Edward Morris, campaigned to get young men signed up. And recruiting boats went around to the bays and signed up young men who had never been out of their own bays before. And these guys knew where these young men were going. They were going to the meat grinder grinder to be cannon fodder, if I can mix a metaphor. And to a war that wasn't necessary. Britain didn't have to be in it, and if Britain didn't have to be in it, even if Britain had to be in it. Newfoundland didn't have to be in it. I would like to hear the responses from some of your guests on that point.
Thanks as always, Frank. I'll put it to the guests. Frank Holden there, calling from St. John's, and we've talked about this before, on the show. That point of whether or not to glorify war, Gary. You and I have talked about this before, and I'll go around to Frank's point here. Well, what are your thoughts on what he's saying?
Yeah, good point. I mean,
you wrote a book on boy soldiers, right?
Appreciate the feedback, and I think we got to look. I guess if you take it in that context of why war, but if you look back in when it started in Newfoundland and Labrador, people didn't know we were so far out in the North Atlantic, and we didn't have our own military or nothing. Then it was all you had was the Newfoundland Constabulary and the Rangers or not the Rangers then, but so it was something that they didn't know, but they looked like they felt that they were answering the call. Their home, the mother country, Britain, was at war, and we were part of the empire, and the call went out, and you had people feel that way, and a lot of them, there's no doubt about it, didn't know what it was all about. To them, it may have been a lark, or they were going over. They all thought that war would be over in less than a year. And the carnage and the suffering, it's unbelievable. And, in order from my just personal opinion, to look back at remembrance, we have to look at it all. But in the remembrance component of it, we're not remembering or glorifying war in any sense, because war is the most horrible thing there is. And in order to probably try and understand about war so we won't have any in the future, but we're not doing a great job, society. All we have to look around what's going on today in the world about wars. But we need to remember those people who went there for service, and regardless of why they went there, I guess there's no doubt about it. It was a meat grinder that they went over to, and a lot of our boys, our bodies, remains are over there. A lot of them. Over 800 in known graves. So there was a lot. They stood up for the home country. They thought they were going to be back. And when after the first 500 and the Royal Naval Reserve left, then was their cousins and brothers and relatives figure, well, they're going over, so we're going to go over too. It's quite a complex issue, and I'm sure there were people at this table who can go further into it, but war's quite complex. But remembering the people who served, in my personal opinion, that's not complex, and we have to do that. Because if we don't, we're not worth, as the Newfoundlander said, we're not worth our own salt. That's my personal opinion.
So Gary Browne, their author and historian, also with me here in studio. We have Earl Ludlow, Chancellor, Memorial University, Frank Gogos, current chair of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, Regimental Advisory Council, and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Museum, and Jeff Webb, professor and head of Memorial University's History Department. Jeff, your thoughts on that?
This is always an important issue, I think, to address. The dilemma of how do we remember the sacrifice and how do we honor those who gave their lives without glorifying and without taking exception to to the horrific effects of war. Over the years, this tension has played out in different ways. Certainly during the Vietnam War period, many students and many young people generally, emphasize the war memorial and memorial itself as this is symbolic of imperialism and all of that sort of thing. So it's only now really that we've gotten past that we have a chance to ask ourselves, as this panel is starting the discussion tomorrow, to ask ourselves, how do we make this this question of remembrance and memorialization relevant again?
Yeah, and do you think some of it, people are subjects of their time, right?
Of course.
And of their governments. And the answer, whether it's now, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and there's the decisions that get made and the complexities or not around that, but then there's just the fact of the loss that's involved. And people thinking that they're answering whatever the call is, that they're answering it for a duty, for something. And that's a lot of what I see that gets remembered.
Well, I mean, nobody is an island, and no island is an island for that matter. I mean, Newfoundland was always part of the world. We were always buffeted by conflict and trade. Part of the funding for the establishment for a memorial came from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, a corporation dedicated to education and international peace. And so for the Carnegie Corporation, they identified memorial as an opportunity to further international understanding and to educate a new generation of leaders who would have a broader view and thus making war and conflict less likely.
Yeah, broader view, connections with people, understanding each other. As the theory goes, you're less likely to want to go to war, as the theory goes. Howard's on the line from Glovertown.
Hi, good day.
Hey, how's Glovertown today?
Doing very well. Yeah, no snow out here.
Okay, there you go.
My father was one of the first 400 to volunteer to go overseas in the Second World War, and with the gallant 166. Now, Memorial is named as a memorial. I was, as a proud Newfoundlander, was personally offended when Memorial eliminated the Ode to Newfoundland without consideration to adding the Ode to Labrador. As many other people have felt the same way. I was just wondering how your panelists, with an honest answer, not a diplomatic one, felt about that.
All right.
It's being reinstated, yes, and I congratulate them for that.
Thanks, Howard. I'll put it to him. And I appreciate you pulling over. I can hear your indicator there. So cheers and thanks for listening as always. All right, the Ode. I'm looking at you as Chancellor of the University.
Well, I think I should take the lead on this one.
I think so, yeah.
And it's I took on the role of Chancellor 3 weeks before the Ode was stopped.
Yeah.
And I will say that it was not a happy day for me. Now, and that's a personal opinion. So, but I'm going to leave it at that, and then I will go to the next step. It was not removed through consultation, as the caller has said. It was removed through an autonomous decision. But to reinstate that took time and through process. And it took 2 years, and it has been reinstated. And the outcome is what it is. Like I said, I'm an advocate of the Ode. I'm a proud Newfoundlander. But I will say that there is only one Ode formally within the Act of the province. I do acknowledge the lack of the reference to Labrador and to other, what I would call very concerning items that were raised during the piece of work that was done by the Senate committee on this topic. It was well done. It was there was involvement. There was consultation, and it was not just what I will call a majority vote. It was done through inclusion of different groups, and so on. We are where we are. It took a long time, but the Ode will be played during convocation this spring.
So that kind of touches on one of the points I wanted to talk to you folks about. That when we talk about remembrance and how it's evolved over the years. Like we did a show last week before, on suffrage, right? Women's suffrage and voting. And how in the beginning, didn't include folks from Labrador. So when we say 100 years of women's suffrage, I mean, it's not all women there. And over time, it got expanded. And we look back, and there's more to talk about. And here, when we talk about remembrance, there are folks, right? It was Newfoundland and Labrador. There are folks that have been left out. Like history has happened, things have happened, people sacrificed and lost, and they don't get talked about. How has remembrance changed over the years? Who's now being included in the umbrella, and where else do we need to go?
If I'm going to jump right in again, and don't forget that in the late 40s, Memorial was not just about the First World War.
Yeah.
It was included. It also included the Second World War and other groups. So it did change. And likewise, I believe there is time for change.
But it's about discussion. Right?
It's about discussion. It's about collaboration. It's about bringing different people and groups in play. And that, believe it or not, is what a university and free thought brings. And it's not always a consensus opinion. I will say that as well, in fairness.
Yeah, I mean, that's civil discussion, right? We're trying to talk, we're trying to get down to it, and we're not always going to agree on stuff, but we have to talk to try to further things. Go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. I totally agree with Earl. And we also, like we talked about, this is a living memorial. And we got to remember, as Earl alluded to it, with the Second World War, the Korean War. And then, of course, it's only in 2014 when the Afghanistan War was on and that was over, and we had there was 158 Canadian men and women who lost their lives in the Afghanistan War. 13 of those people were Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So history and remembrance is an ongoing affair, and Earl hit on the word. The most important word there, and you mentioned it, Adam, is discussion. And I'm not throwing arrows or bows at anyone, but if it had been discussed beforehand with the Legion and people like that and communities here, we have one of the finest universities in the world, and with a music department far better than a lot. And if discussion had gone on, someone could say, well, how can we possibly make the ode? Let's ask the musicians and the people who have doctors of music at MUN and the young people who are going to MUN, come up with some ideas. But that's remembrance and commemoration is a living, ongoing thing, as memorial is a living memorial. And to me, they should be the ones leading us with that. But discussion is so important, and we have to do it right and do it as a community, and it will change and it will become better. And that's the way forward.
What do you think about for the umbrella for remembrance? How has it changed as a historian?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think for every generation, we remember these things again differently. For Memorial, when all of those returned soldiers came home from the Second World War, they brought with them new experiences and then brought their culture back to rural communities, as I was mentioning earlier. And so for the generation of the 1950s, a lot of those veterans, they were adults when they came to Memorial, as opposed to 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds. So for them, the memory of lost colleagues and the memory of their parents and aunts and uncles in many cases that had been casualties of war was very, 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 very vivid. When I'm talking to people on campus now, I have friends who are faculty members and students who are Ukrainian. There is no doubt that this is absolutely a part of their experience every single day. There are a great many students and faculty members and staff at the university that are from parts of the world and have family members in parts of the world that are currently undergoing all sorts of conflict. And so for them, Newfoundland is both a peaceful and safe refuge, but it's also, I think, Memorial has a key kind of a resonance for them as well. That's a little different from people like myself who grew up here and have always, Memorial has always been home for me, but it's the memorial aspect of it doesn't resonate the same with me as it does with my friend Maria from Kyiv. Mm-hmm.
Frank, what do you think? When you're giving tours, when you're over, earlier on the show, you talked about young folks, right? What is the reaction? And I know there must be a range of reactions, but what are some of the when stuff starts to click with people as you're talking, as you're teaching, or they're learning, and you're around them? What are some things that get said or noticed from young folks?
Well, there's a lot there to unpack. Yeah. Going back to how remembrance changed first in my lifetime, I think the discussion with the Afghanistan war and the losses that were starting to hit home for Newfoundland started to open people's eyes. And then we rolled right into the 100th anniversary of the First World War. And, we take that, and when we go overseas with the kids, we engage them in a way. The first thing that they'll start to see is the cemeteries on the Somme. We drive down the highway from Paris on our way to our first hotel, and then we get about an hour into the drive, and then they start seeing the cross of sacrifices. And that's when the discussion starts. And no matter how many books you read, how many documents you read, how well you think your understanding is of what happened during the First World War, you will never, ever, ever understand it without putting boots on the ground and seeing it firsthand. How small the battlefield was at Beaumont Hamel and other battlefields. Going back to Frank Holden, that said, we went off and we were cattle fodder, and why did we go? Well, the First World War is probably one of those wars, and the reason why it still sticks today is he is right. It was a very useless war. It was driven by other ideologies. Not much unlike what's happening today, unfortunately. But when we take those kids overseas and we start seeing the change in them, they are becoming the torchbearers. And we are seeing this, and you are seeing this. You've probably interviewed a few of them. Yeah. And they have learned from that experience. They've taken from that experience, and now they're creating a new experience of remembrance.
If you want to join this discussion, how has remembrance shaped our collective identity? Anyone left out from that? What does it look like in today's world? How is it evolving? How should it evolve? The numbers of callers, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. We've got someone on the line. Michael Boyle is on from St. John's. Hi, Michael.
Good afternoon, and could I say gentlemen? I don't see any ladies or hear any ladies.
No, it's a manel today. There was one extra person supposed to make it, but she could not. So
that may be important to remember. You know what I mean? That may be an important issue. I don't think I heard too many people talk about the role of women, but that's not my topic for today. First of all, good program. Good program and excellent guests, and it's always good to remember, no matter what particular group. The more you remember, the more you have an appreciation of other people's culture, and I think that's great to do. But however, my issue is that last year we had the repatriation of the unknown soldier, and what a fantastic job that happened for Newfoundland and for Labrador. Fantastic. The War Memorial itself is an amazing historical place. But at the same time, if you go to Europe, one of the things you notice in Europe, when you have a war memorial, you've got the names of people served. If I had a grandfather who was involved in World War I, I'd be really disappointed. Downtown St. John's came to the War Memorial, and there's no name there. It's sort of like the horse and cart go together. It may be, one would have thought, perhaps, that the authorities, when they were, reconstructing the War Memorial, it might have been an idea to have the names of the ordinary people who fought in the war, all of them included, around the site.
All right, I'll put that to my guests. Thank you very much. And Michael, I will say Gary Browne did mention, when we're talking about the Afghanistan war, he did mention the men and women who served. But to your point, yes, there's a lot more to talk about men, women, and folks who've sacrificed for war. Thanks for the call. Michael Boyle, Air Conference St. John's. I saw a couple fingers. Who wants to go first?
I think this is a great point, and certainly in the 1920s, when people were doing memorials, generally what they had in mind was granite and brass. That was kind of people's idea of what a memorial was. This discussion brings very much to mind, a few years ago I visited Washington, D.C., and the Vietnam War Memorial there was incredibly controversial. There were a large number of people, particularly veterans, who wanted a more traditional memorial, and then there were others who wanted one that reflected the names, quite literally. And so they built both. And if you visit there, there is a large stone wall that emerges from the ground in one area and descends into the ground in the other that has the name of every American. Notably, it doesn't have the name of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Vietnamese people and Cambodian people that died in that conflict.
Yeah.
It's only the Americans that died in that conflict. But nonetheless, all of those names are engraved there. And I found, even as a Canadian who had I been an American, I wouldn't have been old enough to have been involved in that conflict anyway. But yet it is still quite moving to see all of those names and to be standing there seeing your own face reflected in the shiny surface and thinking, well, had it been different circumstances, that may have been my name there instead of seeing my face there. So certainly, identifying particular people's names individually, it's not only it's very, very important to the family, but it does get us away from just the crude numbers of such and such a percentage, such and so many hundred, so many thousand. In a way, though, those are they're nameless and they can't be identified. The names, and particularly the surnames, it can make it much more immediate to people.
Yeah, well, it's the people stories, right? You walk through the rooms and you see pictures of folks. You see the write-ups that are there in the exhibit at the rooms for the First World War, and that speaks a lot to you. Frank, go ahead.
I'd just like to add to this. I think Michael was asking about all the names. So, if you're going to consider all the names, you're going to get yourself into a corner where you are going to miss somebody. And I have been involved building memorials now for about 15 years. And my experience has been, no matter how fastidious you are in trying to track down every person who served during a particular conflict, you're going to miss, or you're going to add somebody that wasn't there. Second, to your point about having the names of those who died here, very much has been attempted once, and those who are missing from the Newfoundland Expeditionary Force in the First World War are actually at Bowring Park. This was an initiative taken on in 2009, but I was also involved in that, and one of the questions I raised was, how come we're not bringing the names of the guys who are buried overseas? Because you make the argument to bring the names of the missing home so the families can touch the plaques. Those same families who have soldiers who have died overseas can't afford to fly over and do the same thing there. Whether or not, and you probably know as well, Gary, that Padre Angle did try to bring the missing memorial home, but it was decided to put an original one in Beaumont Hamel.
Here's a point. Someone just left a message. What's missed in conversations about memorial? Also, the work of the anti-war movement. People are protesting against war, against imperialism. It's important to remember their contribution. Right, and you can see it on campus now with protests. Go ahead. Yeah,
excuse me. That is an important issue the caller brings up, but we got to remember too, and it's so important. The reason they have that ability, the anti-war people and people who have protests, they gained that through the sacrifice given by the men and women who fought and laid down their lives for peace and human rights. So they have, anyone can speak their mind today in our great society, and these people who did that. But
there is an argument there over the First World War with that point, right? Because when we talk about gaining rights and freedoms, I mean, I think the Second World War gets a little easier for that one. The First World War is, to Frank's point, about the point of, there is a bit of a conversation there about gaining rights around, there's the sacrifice and then what you get from it too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, if I may, before we finish, I think it's important, Adam, I hope to share this on Saturday, but just prior to Remembrance Day on November 11th, 2024, I received a phone call from a very proud retired member of the Canadian Armed Forces, excuse me, a Newfoundlander living in the Maritimes who had served with me in the 1960s in the Canadian Forces. He was disgusted, disheartened, and felt disrespected that the administration of a regional school was requesting military personnel and veterans not to attend Remembrance Day ceremonies in uniform. These were the same uniforms that were proudly worn by the 158 Canadian Forces heroes who lost their lives in the Afghanistan War, and like I said, 13 who were Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It was also the same uniform worn by the men and women who served in Afghanistan and who today often suffer in silence from physical and mental wounds received in Afghanistan. And Dr. Bennett, a senior fellow in education policy of Macdonald-Laurier Institute and an adjunct professor at St. Mary's, made the following statement, and I quote, and I think it's important for what we're doing at MUN today too, and here's what he said on this incident. Barring the service and veterans' uniforms from a school remembrance ceremony was a colossal blunder. But it is also symptomatic of the wider trends eroding our schools. More needs to be done to revive a sense of historical consciousness and to change the school leadership culture for the sake of our future generations, unquote. So I thought that was and it shows you how remembrance is ongoing and living, and it's important. And sometimes comments made off the cuff. Just remember, there's an awful lot of complexity involved in remembrance, and there's a lot of people. I remember when the signing of my books that I wrote on World War I, families would come up to me in Newfoundland, and you would swear that it was last week that they lost their uncle, but these are their great uncles. They are so proud of them today, and so we oftentimes will say, "Oh, that happened in 1900 or 1914." That is living with these people. So we got to be sensitive to that, too. It's not something happening in the past.
Well, and the trauma of it and what it meant for Newfoundland and Labrador and, wrecking this place economically, spiritually, for a lot of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, and this aligns, I think, with several of our last panel members. And I'm going to say panel because I'm getting into the mode now for Saturday.
You're getting ready. I can feel it.
Yeah, we're focusing a lot on the First World War and the Army, but let's not forget the Navy. We haven't talked about those. And let's talk about the contribution there and where it was. And let's talk about the Air Force.
The Air Force. Let's talk about the forestry. Let's talk about the nurses, the ambulance drivers, you name it.
This is an all-inclusive piece that is so important to remember. Let me just take it back again. When we talked, and Frank in particular, when we were talking a little while ago, people may not realize, but we have approximately 120 countries represented at Memorial University. We have, as you were saying, you have Ukrainians, we have Palestinians, we have Israelis, we have people from Nigeria. We have them from, it's almost impossible to name. So to walk those, I'm going to say there's a fine line, and they have freedoms too. And coming here is a freedom that they could only have aspired to have. And I think, Jeff, that was your point. And freedom, safety, fresh air is something that we take for granted. This is almost like a smorgasbord I wanted to get in because one of the things Frank also said was one of the, the boots on the ground and seeing the cross as well. I was honored to be a member of the repatriation party that went this spring. And I very proud to be, and I went, and I had no impact, though. I had no idea of the impact it was going to have on me, to the point, I'm going to try it now, and I'll probably lose it again, but I still cannot speak publicly about it without becoming emotional. And that's the impact. And I've read a lot about this, and I had, through the different groups I've been associated with. But the actual involvement, dedication of all parties, some are sitting at this table. Matter of fact, a couple of them are sitting at this table. And, the attention to detail. And I'll tell you the thing that really stuck in my mind was when we were flying back in on the jet, and the two, I think they were F-18s.
The escort
came up on the wings.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I'm losing it.
Yeah.
And we're bringing our boy home.
Yeah,
and that to me makes it happen. And that rings so true for everything here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We got it. It is emotional, right? And any time I find now I've not been over to Europe, but I have been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki for the anniversaries of the bombings, right? And I've heard from survivors. I've interviewed survivors, and the things that one of the interesting bits I find from either looking at folks here, over in Japan, everywhere else, a lot of the discussion of loss and sacrifice and suffering they're so similar, even though different sides and different wars, yet the conversations around remembrance, there's so many through lines there for different cultures. We got a note, Anzac Day. the 25th of April each year. Australia and New Zealand got slaughtered in Turkey in 1915. The Newfoundland Regiment was there. It marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by Australian and New Zealand forces during the First World War. So someone just left a note just kind of marking the significance of time and where we're having this conversation.
So on Saturday morning, there will be a wreath-laying ceremony at the cairn behind the
Branch 56.
Branch 56 to commemorate.
Okay.
So this is not just by happenstance. This is all planned around Anzac Day, the wreath laying, this, and again the regiment's birthday party that evening. So it's
and not only that, but there'll be people there from on Saturday at the ball and at the panel discussion who are representing from the Australian and New Zealand consulates. So we're also very proud of that relationship with our brothers in arms, as they used to call themselves in the old days. So they're not forgotten, I can assure you.
In the last couple of minutes of the show, where do you want to see things go with remembrance as we move into the future, whether it's through Memorial University or just overall? Frank, go ahead.
I think we've made great inroads and in getting to younger people. And I probably shouldn't say this, but our education system seems to not give much attention to our history. And the program that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador runs every year now for the Trail of the Caribou Pilgrimage is designed to bring as many students into the knowledge of what took place and the brutality of war and the cost on the Newfoundland society. So, we need to continue those types of programming, and when those students then go into the university needs to take them into the fold and continue that programming. We are at a time in the world where people have stopped listening to each other. And, this is not something new. This has come up in every era, and now it's on our shores, what we're facing. And, I'm old enough now to be out of the war issues, but my kids are not. And so I have a real fear that we're going in the wrong direction, even though here in Newfoundland we seem to lead an understanding of what remembrance actually is.
Jeff, final thoughts?
I couldn't agree with you more, Frank. There's never been a time in my life, I know this sounds like special pleading, but there's never been a time in my life when it seemed like the study of history is more urgent.
Absolutely.
Not only for what happened, but for the critical skills to be able to read evidence and make balanced judgments. We have many leaders in the world who are lying to their own people and lying to each other and lying to all of us about who started conflict, who's an enemy, who's a friend, whether or not vaccines cause disease or prevent disease. There has never been a time in my lifetime, I think of all of our lifetimes, when it hasn't been more urgent that young people and older people learn how to sort out lies from truth.
Yeah, maybe not. Don't get your major in memeology for your opinions. Earl, final thought. 30 seconds, guys. We're almost out of time.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote my father.
Yeah.
Never forget where we come from, but don't let it also only determine your future. And I think we have an incredible success story. We should always remember all of our, be it the Marine Institute, be it Grenfell and our other campuses, they are all connected to remembering. And they're also focused on the creation and development of a even better university as we go forward. Never forget, we have hundreds of thousands, 100,000 plus alumni out there right now that has gone through our great institution. Which, by the way, not that I'm biased, but is the best university in Canada. Thank you.
Gary Browne, final thoughts.
I'd just like to say, from my point of view,
20 seconds, by the
I
way.
personally believe that MUN, as our living university, has a moral obligation to our people and to those who went over, lost their lives, their families, and that moral obligation has to live on. When a young a boy who couldn't read, a Victoria Cross winner, Tommy Ricketts, came back and went to university and became a pharmacist and came out. That's the stories we want to take. But MUN, you do have a moral obligation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it for today's show. Tomorrow, we're in the final days of the federal election campaign. You will hear from folks who've been volunteering, and the lines will be open. Have candidates and parties done enough to earn your vote? Tell us about it tomorrow.
Oh.